Thank you for joining me today. Welcome to the wonderful Kimberly's Cultural Kitchen. This is a cooking blog that I hope offers my relationships in learning more about food and giving a voice to the ethnic and cultural diversity in our community. I hope that we will have some chefs and some cookbook authors in the future. And yes, maybe even a few Issaquah Highlands residents like yourselves that I know have some amazing cooking talents out there and willing to share. So hopefully you'll come along on the journey with me. So today, in honor of Black History Month, we thought it would be the perfect time to celebrate the deliciousness that we see in the traditions of food of New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. So joining me is Issaquah Highlands resident Lynne Varner and former Issaquah Highlands resident Kandace Barton. Thank you, ladies. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And could you tell me about your current families right now, since we're talking about families? Lynne, how about you?
Yeah, so I live in Magnolia Park section of the Highlands, and my husband Paul and my son Jackson was a sophomore in college. But like most college students, he's right upstairs.
And Kandace, how about you?
I, as Kimberly mentioned, am a former resident of Issaquah Highlands proper, but I have about 2 years ago, relocated just to the other side of the foothills to East Renton Highlands, where I live with my husband, Lauren, 20 years this year. And my two boys, Lawson, who's a freshman at O'Day High School, and Landon, who is in 6th grade at Maywood. So we're still in the district.
Yeah, not far. And as you know, Issaquah Highlands, we never let you really go. You're still a part of us. And I appreciate you. And I know you're still friends with so many people here. Absolutely. So even though you're gone, you're not really gone. You're still a part of the community. So thank you both. And myself, of course, I have two children as well. I'm married to Howard, who is part of the community here and on the board of HFN. And we are in the Dahlia Park neighborhood, not far from Bark Park. And I have two high schoolers. One, David, who is away at school. He's in Georgia, where it's snowing right now. And Sydney, who's at Eastside Catholic. So she's a sophomore. So 2 kids, and they eat a lot. So as we're talking about food and traditions, New Year's Eve Day and Eve, I think we all use food to talk about our past and how it relates to that. So for you both, what does New Year's Eve or Day mean to you and your families? Lynne?
For me, it's a way to connect with my family, my grandparents, and just my ancestors. It's the one time that I know that we're all thinking the same thing. We're thinking about our hopes and dreams for the next year. And we mainly do that through food. I mean, that's how I grew up. I grew up in a Southern household. My father's from South Carolina, my mother's from North Carolina. And so New Year's Eve was always preparing for the big feast on New Year's Day. I also grew up in a Baptist family, so New Year's Eve was also church. So you had to do a lot of the preparation earlier. For example, beans. You always had black-eyed peas, but there could also be northern beans too, which I never liked the great northern white beans, but they were a staple growing up. And so sometimes I still cook them today. So the day before is all about soaking those beans. And I'm one of those who does it old school, where you change the water out every half hour to an hour. So it's kind of a process where you've got to keep going back and you're soaking the beans. When all the water is out, some people are like, I'm done. Well, no, I have to put more water in because they've got to soak a full 24 hours.
Right.
Cleaning your greens. I mean, do you all fill up your sink with water and soak those greens?
Yep.
Do that. So the day before is all about that. The old-fashioned way is to smoke your turkey so you can season your greens with that. I don't do that. I've tried to wean myself off of a lot of meat. So I take a shortcut, which is Lipton's onion soup mix as my seasoning. So I don't have to worry about smoking meat. But yeah, the day before New Year's Eve is just all about preparing for that feast. If I'm going to do rice, then I've got to get the rice out and measure that. I used to use a rice cooker. I don't do that anymore. So there's another process that you're going to have to sift your rice, clean it, and then get that cooking on the stove. It's all about the kitchen the day before.
You're right. You're right. How about you, Kandace? What was New Year's Eve or New Year's Day like for you?
For us, much like Lynne, a lot about our New Year's Eve centered around church. Mm-hmm. I come from also a Baptist background where my grandmother was an elders in the church. And so that meant spending New Year's Eve night, whatever day of the week that fell on, at church in watch service, as we called it. You went early in the evening and you prayed your way through midnight so that you were hopeful, and hopeful about the new year and the new day coming in the new year. We, like Lynne, our family would do a lot of the food prep the night before, with greens and chitlins and other fixings that we would look forward to the next day. But my most favorite was my grandmother's hot water cornbread. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the items that you would fix day of, and you would get it fresh out of the skillet onto whatever plate of fixings you had and enjoy your New Year's Day. So that is kind of how we finished the year and started the new year. It was lots of singing, it was lots of remembering, but it was very hopeful about what was to come.
Kandace, I'm so glad you brought up chitlins, because I forgot that, which was a staple. Chitlins and pig feet growing up.
Yeah.
And we say, Kim, that this is partly because African-American culture, we didn't always have the best cuts.
No.
We didn't have the money for it.
Mm-hmm.
Our ancestors were enslaved and they mm-hmm. weren't given the best cuts of meat, but you would make these amazing, delicious meals out of whatever was thrown your way.
Right.
And chitlins and pig feet, that was one of them.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, as my grandmother would say, we would eat our colors. You know, she would mm-hmm. talk about those oranges and those yellows and those deep greens and those browns. She would say it would be the colors that look best on us. Those are the ones that you should eat and reflect. Yes. Mm-hmm. So she would always tell me that any of those are the ones that you should make sure to make part of your diet. So just like you ladies, the same. I was a Baptist family, once again, part of that growing up was still just being a part of that family New Year's Eve, prepping, going to church with the family, and then making sure when you came back, she would at least have something on the stove that could sit, so that while we were at church, we could come back and have a little something. And mm-hmm. for us, it was a strange mix. My grandmother was born in the actual cabin that still sits on our property in Lynchburg, that we know was the slave cabin that was part of our property. We actually inherited our property as sharecroppers, that we actually bought from the property that was part of our slave heritage. So we actually know that property that she was born in was actually part of, where we come from. So it's a weird mix in that we know she's part Indian and part African American, and so her heritage would reflect that. So her food often was the strong sweet potatoes and the beans, and definitely the corn, those rich foods like that. And she would definitely make sure we had that. But before going to church, she would always put the start of a gumbo on the stove and have it ready, so that when we came back, it was just a finishing of something like that. So we could all have a little bit when we came back home, because we were starving, in order to wake up the next day and continue on with everything else. So I agree, it's all the same kind of thing. And then it was off to the races the next day to get through New Year's Day. So in that we have a lot of similarities. Now that we've talked about the traditions of the people that brought them here, and obviously are pretty much part of what make us up, what have we done with those traditions, and how have we changed those to define who we are today? Obviously, we've made the things that have created our roots, but how have we tweaked them now to start those for our own families, to kind of change who they are? So Lynne, what have you done with some of those recipes to kind of make them your own?
Biggest thing I've added is champagne and seafood.
What? I like it. I like the way you think. Tell me more.
Being out in the Northwest and having access to really great seafood, there's just no way we could have any type of celebration without crab or shrimp or just a really good cut of halibut. So that's always on the menu too. Plus, it's easy.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just putting crab legs in the oven to steam for 5 or 10 minutes. That's way easier than, roasting the big birds that our parents did. The other thing, the champagne is also about celebrating the good fortune, because growing up, my parents really were like, let's hope next year is better financially. Let's hope, sister so-and-so is doing better. We are very fortunate in our lives. And so we're looking at the new year more in celebration. Last year, not 2020, but for the most part, our years are good. And we're looking at the next one saying, here's to you, cheers.
Yeah.
That's where the champagne comes from. My son loves mac and cheese, which is the bane of my existence because of all the cheese and the dairy, but I make that every New Year's. And that wasn't something that we necessarily did growing up. But I've added that for him. Sometimes I add crab, so it's crab mac and cheese, and then I don't have, that's the entree. That's what we're going to have in addition to black eyed peas and rice. So yes, I've added a couple of new things. And then in terms of, we don't always go to, if we go to church the night before, then we're sleeping in. Nobody's getting up before noon. And then my husband goes straight, he can find a football game at any time. I mean, at 3:00 in the morning, he could find a game to watch. So that's what he's going to be doing. And I'm going to put on some jazz. And like I said, because we're cooking differently, I can chill for the day, unlike our parents and grandparents who had to do a lot of cooking.
And feeding of everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference, is they were feeding literally everyone.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And now, you think about it, we've all moved away from the homes of our family. We've gotten away, we carry our roots with us, but no one's knocking on our door on, New Year's Day that we've got to rush up and suddenly fix them a plate. But our parents did have to expect it. And so big pots of stuff always, my mother would have it simmering, which I always thought, I hope you're not overcooking that, but you always had to have it warm because you never knew who was going to come by, and she didn't use a microwave.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Candace, how about you? How have you changed some of the things that you love?
So much like you guys, we don't live anywhere near our family in Texas anymore. And so, we have everything kind of on a smaller scale, which means that we can be a little more adventurous. So because we are like you guys here in the Pacific Northwest, taking advantage of the seafood. But I think what we've also introduced to our boys is just a little offering of some of what, my husband and I grew up with. So instead of having full pots of black eyed peas, we just make sure you have your spoonful, and learn how to make, cornbread dressing. Now, I will admit we do kind of cheat a little bit and do Jiffy, but I meet the boys where they are, and that's what they know how to cook. So maybe this year we'll introduce them to the hot skillet and the hot water cornbread. But we also do fried chicken, which was something that we didn't get to do a lot of for New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, just because of the amount of people that needed to be fed. But in our own families, in our own lives, we do love it. And so we take advantage of fried chicken on New Year's Day, along with just those little fixings and those little snatches of what we grew up with. Much like you, Lynn, we have a favorite drink, or at least my husband and I do. Instead of champagne, we do Pimm's, because we moved here from the UK, and that was one of our favorite drinks. And so we prepare Pimm's kind of, around noon on New Year's Eve, because we like to toast in the New Year's and text with our friends who are still in the UK, and we sip on that all the way through the rest of the day. So it's, you know, it's taking advantage of, you know, where we are in our lives, and the fact that we've had so many unique experiences, and bringing it all together to celebrate it at New Year's and New Year's Eve.
Yeah, and I love that. You're right about the travel aspect. I mean, that's something that definitely our parents never would have had, where I know you've had deep relations and still have deep friends in the UK, and that time that you spent with your boys, it's amazing, and how it changed their outlook. I have something similar, in a little bit different, in that I'm married to a wonderful Jewish guy, and I have a very close relationship with his family. And that long-term relationship has kind of changed how I cook, because I feel that my Jewish background now has changed and twisted my food. You know, it's once again that thing that's in your pantry. And when you start to cook that way, they kind of mesh together, right? So now I find myself making things like taking, using matzah meal, because I have it in the pantry, and making matzah meal fried chicken. Or I'll take that leftover sweet potato and make sweet potato challah bread. It's taking that brisket and using it a different way. It's meshing those two cultures together in different ways. Black-eyed pea hummus, which is something that's definitely something we never would have done before coming out to the Pacific Northwest or heard of. And now it's even sold locally by a well-known chef that we know here in our stores out here. So those kind of things with still a twist of who we are is one thing. But now you have my kids who have come along in the Pacific Northwest, and their love is everything Asian, which, you know, I love that too, but they are truly children of this era and this area. So you're talking about the love of ramen, the love of all things sushi. So we'll take that leftover pot liquor from the greens and make, pot liquor ramen. I mean, we did that one day and it was really, really good because that's what we had. And we said, why not? So there you go. We created collard green egg rolls because that's what we wanted. So it's taking those kind of things, and that's where my kids are going with it, and just making their own twist, but I'm finding it's that Asian twist with still a little of us, but still tweaking it to being a little of what they love about being here. So they're the next generation of where I think things are going, and continuing our traditions and where they're going to be. So I'm hoping, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's going to be cool to see our kids are going to carry forth some of their favorites from childhood, which are from our childhood, right? But then like what you're saying, Kim, about they're now immersed in new flavors. They are traveling. They're friends with people who've traveled a lot. And so their palates are just way broader than, we could ever. I grew up snacking on, chips, and my son snacks on edamame beans. Right. And the first time my mother saw that, she's like, what are those? Is he eating lima beans? Because it just got to be full.
Right. I mean, yeah, my son puts together charcuterie boards. I mean, that's his thing. Who knew, right? Like, we didn't even know how to say charcuterie when we were not even sure we know how to spell it right now, but that's his thing. When he comes home and he wants to snack, truly snack, that is his meat and cheese platter, and he believes in truly like really measuring out and making sure that there's an even amount of soft cheeses to hard cheeses to, the meats and the whole bit. So
unbelievable.
It's yeah, you're right. Our kids are not only much more in depth in what they eat, but they are well versed. And I think that's also has to say with, as you say, Lynn, who their friends are, and that cultural diversity of friends that they have, that's their palate. You're absolutely right. So it's good to be our kids, right?
Well, talk about it, because my kids work for money to go down to Pike Place Market to afford crab legs. Because Mom, we've worked hard and we've got our money. Let's go buy crab legs.
Well, at least they understand the price of a crab leg, right? They know.
Exactly.
Well, ladies, this is amazing. Thank you so much for giving me the time and enjoying the talking about our food and our traditions of New Year's. Always a pleasure. Lynne, thank you for joining me. Kandace, as always, thank you for being here. And once again, I hope to meet again to talk about the cultural connections that we have with food and you. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.